First, I trusted her. First, I let her into my kitchen. First, I gave her the kind of friendship that leaves a spare key under the mat and a name on the emergency contact list. There are people who enter your life loudly. They arrive with drama, with warnings, with flashing lights around their edges. You know not to lean too close. And then there are people like Mara. Soft-voiced. Warm-handed. Always listening like your secrets were small birds she was carefully sheltering in both palms. She was my best friend for 12 years. Long enough to remember my terrible haircut in college. Long enough to know I cried at old commercials and never returned borrowed containers. Long enough that when my husband Daniel first met her, he said, "She feels like family." That was the first mistake. Family sounds harmless when you say it out loud. It sounds stable. It sounds like someone who will stay in the frame while the rest of the picture changes. Daniel and I were ordinary in the way people envy before they begin to hate you for it. We had a mortgage. We had a dog who barked at delivery trucks and slept between us like a tiny border patrol. We argued about groceries, about thermostat settings, about whether the towels were truly clean or only not dirty enough. We were not perfect. But we were ours. I thought that mattered more than perfection. Mara knew how to look harmless. She wore soft colors. She used my first name like a promise. She never said anything cruel directly. That is what made her dangerous. Cruelty with a smile is harder to identify. It hides in concern. It hides in timing. It hides in the sentence, "I only told you because I love you." At first she was simply present. Too present, but in the way that can be mistaken for loyalty. She remembered Daniel's coffee order. She remembered our anniversary. She remembered which wine I liked and which one made me get a headache. She remembered everything. And memory, when used correctly, can feel like devotion. She started small. "You seem tired," she said once, when Daniel was in the bathroom and I was rinsing dishes. "Are you happy?" Her voice was gentle, almost clinical, like she was checking a pulse. I laughed. "Of course I'm happy." But she tilted her head, as if happiness were something she could test for cracks. In the beginning, I defended Daniel too much. That is how you know something is already beginning to rot. Healthy things do not require constant explanation. A marriage should not feel like a witness statement. Daniel worked late. Mara noticed. Daniel forgot to text back sometimes. Mara noticed. Daniel smiled at the wrong moment, or too long, or not long enough, and Mara noticed that too. She never said, "He is cheating." She never had to. She only asked questions that left stains. "Has he always been like this?" "Like what?" "That distant." "Sometimes he gets absorbed in work." Mara would nod slowly, with the patience of someone watching a diagnosis unfold. "Interesting," she would say. "I just thought you should know how it looks." How it looks. That is where the poison lived. Not in facts. In appearance. In the thin layer between truth and interpretation where doubt can breed quietly and endlessly. The first time I truly felt uneasy was at her birthday dinner. It was held in a restaurant with exposed brick walls and too many candles, the kind of place that tries to make a Tuesday feel important. Mara arrived late. Daniel arrived on time. I remember that detail because I used to believe punctuality was a form of character. She hugged him a little too long. Not enough for a stranger to notice. Just enough for me to feel the shape of it. Then she pulled back and looked at me with that same soft face, the one that never seemed capable of a bad thought. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm glad both of you could make it. Both of you." She said it like we were a unit she had assembled herself. Later, while Daniel was at the bar, she leaned across the table and touched my wrist. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her eyes were steady. Too steady. "Are you sure he respects you?" That was the beginning of the end, although I did not know it yet. I only felt my stomach tighten. I only heard the blood moving in my ears. I only laughed too quickly and said, "What kind of question is that?" "The kind people are too polite to ask," she said. Then she smiled. "Forget it. I'm overthinking." But she wasn't. She was beginning. After that, the air changed. Not all at once. It never does. It thins. It becomes harder to breathe and easier to doubt yourself. Mara started sending me screenshots. "Did you know he liked this? Why would he save this account?" "Just asking because I care." It was always something small. A comment on a photo. A laugh reaction. A deleted message someone else had reposted. Enough to irritate. Not enough to prove anything. That is how a person destroys a marriage without ever touching it directly. They do not bring a hammer. They bring a dropper. A single drop at a time. I asked Daniel once very calmly if something was going on. He looked at me as though I had spoken in a language he did not recognize. "With who?" he asked. "With anyone," I said. "With Mara, with work, with your phone. I don't know." He exhaled through his nose, tired already, as if my question itself had insulted him. "You're letting her get in your head." There it was. The sentence that split everything in two. Not a denial. Not comfort. A dismissal wrapped in reason. "You think I'm crazy?" I asked. "No," he said too fast. "I think you're stressed." Stressed. That lovely word people use when they want your pain to sound temporary. After that, I began seeing patterns everywhere. A forgotten lunch. A long pause before he answered a text. A new cologne on his jacket that did not belong to me. Maybe some of it was real. Maybe some of it was paranoia. But Mara fed on that uncertainty like it was the only thing she had ever really loved. She called me every night. She became my witness, my translator, my audience. "I'm worried about you," she whispered once at midnight when I was sitting in the dark kitchen and staring at Daniel's untouched dinner. "I'm fine." "No," she said softly. "You sound like someone trying not to fall apart in front of me." I should have hung up. I should have understood that concern can be an intrusion when it is repeated with surgical precision. Instead, I cried. And she let me. That was the trick. She always let me collapse in a way that made her look like the only stable object in the room. The first proof came on a Thursday. Not because life respects dramatic timing, but because it prefers irony. Daniel left his laptop open while he showered. I was not looking for anything. At least that is what I told myself later. But I saw the notification window. A message preview. A name I did not recognize. I clicked it. Of course I clicked it. There is a moment in every betrayal where the person betrayed becomes a detective against their will. What I found was not what Mara had been hinting at. It was worse in a different way. Not a confession. Not romance. Not even a clean villainy I could point to and name. It was private laughter. Private complaints. Messages to his coworker about being trapped in the middle and not knowing how to handle my wife's moods. My wife's moods. My chest went cold. Not because he was talking about me behind my back. That hurt, yes. But because the language was so neat, so casual, so ready to reduce my fear into a personality flaw. When I confronted him, He did not deny the messages. He didn't have to. He just rubbed his forehead and said, "That's not what it sounds like." "Then what does it sound like?" I asked. He looked past me. Not at me. Past me. Like there was a better version of this conversation somewhere in the room and he could not find it. "It sounds like you've been on edge for months," he said. "And now you're turning everything into proof." That word. Proof. He said it like I was the one standing trial. I laughed then. A small, ugly sound. Not because anything was funny, but because there are only so many ways a person can absorb humiliation before it begins to come back out as something else. That night I called Mara. I wanted sympathy. I wanted outrage. I wanted the version of her that existed when she was on my side. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the messages. I told her about Daniel's tone. I told her I felt like I was losing my own mind. I told her I didn't know what was real anymore. She was quiet for a long time. Too long. Then she said, "I need to be honest with you." Those words always come just before the knife. "I didn't want to say this," she continued, "because I didn't want to hurt you." Her voice had gone thin and delicate. "But I think you should know Daniel and I have been talking more than usual." The room tilted. Well. For a second I could not hear anything except the electric hum of the refrigerator. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," she said carefully, "he's been confiding in me. About you, about the marriage, about how difficult things have become." She paused. Let the silence do its work. "And honestly," she whispered, "I think he's been lonely for a while." There are words that do not simply wound. They rearrange the anatomy of the person hearing them. Lonely. Difficult. Confiding. The nouns and verbs slid together into a picture I could not disprove because the picture had already begun to live inside me. I asked her if she was sleeping with my husband. She made a small sound that could have been offense or sadness. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't make me the villain because I was trying to protect you." Protect me. She used the word with such ease that for a sick moment I almost believed her. By morning, I was no longer crying. I was calm in the coldest possible way. Calm like a locked room. Daniel slept in the guest room. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my reflection in the black glass of the microwave. I did not look broken. I looked organized. That was the dangerous thing. I began making a list. Not with revenge in mind. Not yet. At first it was only survival. Times. Dates. Screenshots. Voice notes. Deleted stories that had been archived, then unarchived, then mysteriously saved in someone else's folder. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. Mara had not been guessing. She had been arranging. Small meetings. Private calls. Convenient misunderstandings. She had nudged Daniel toward irritation and then held out her hand like a saint offering shelter. She was not just my best friend. She was the person who knew exactly where the weak hinges were in my life. And once you know where the hinges are, a door becomes much easier to open from the wrong side. I stopped answering her calls. She sent me one message. Then 5. Then a paragraph that began with, "I'm worried about you," and ended with, "I hope you don't do anything impulsive." Impulsive. Another lovely word. Another way to sound unstable without saying it outright. I read the message 3 times. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I understood her now. She thought I was the kind of woman who would cry in private and forgive in public. She thought I would protect the shape of my own humiliation just to keep the furniture from moving. But humiliation has a strange alchemy. Left alone long enough, it becomes fuel. I began with the files, then the photos, then the messages I had never meant to save but somehow had. I printed everything. Not copies. Evidence. There is a difference. And while I sorted through the fragments of my marriage, I discovered something else. Mara had been performing her innocence in other places too. At work. In her volunteer group. With the men she flirted with, accidentally. With the women she praised until they handed her their confidence like a coat at the door. She had a reputation. Of course she did. People like her always do. It was clean, generous, almost luminous from a distance. Kind. Caring. The friend who checks in. The one who notices everything. I stared at that reputation like it was a locked safe, and I had finally found the combination. I did not move yet. I waited. I listened. I learned the rhythm of her lies, the timing of her concern, the people she called first when she wanted to plant an idea. She thought she had ruined my marriage. Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't done the whole thing alone. Maybe Daniel and I were already cracked, and she only pressed where the fracture was weakest. But one thing became very clear to me in those first quiet days after the truth began to surface. Mara had made a mistake. She had mistaken my silence for surrender. And silence, when chosen, is not surrender at all. It is preparation. I sat in my car outside her apartment that evening, holding my phone in both hands, and watched the lights come on in her windows one by one. She was home. Safe. Comfortable. Probably believing she had already won. I looked at the screenshots one more time. At the names. At the timestamps. At the places where her voice slipped just enough to reveal intention. Then I opened my notes app and began writing every person who still thought she was good. One by one. Carefully. Deliberately. Because if she had chosen to make my life a story, then I was finally ready to write the ending. I started with the smallest truths. Not the dramatic ones. The kind that survive being repeated. I sent one message first. Then another. Then a third, carefully worded, to the woman from her volunteer board who always defended her. I did not accuse. Accusation invites argument. Facts invite silence. I attached screenshots. I attached timestamps. I attached the little pieces of her voice that made the whole thing impossible to dismiss. At first, there was nothing. That was almost worse. People read. People pause. People decide whether the world they thought they knew can remain intact if they look away quickly enough.
Oh, then the questions began. Quiet ones. Private ones. The right kind of questions, the kind that are already halfway to belief. Did she really say that? How long had this been going on? Why would she tell you that about your husband? Because she thought I was already broken, I wanted to say. Because she confused panic with weakness. Because she believed she could stand in the wreckage she had caused and still look like the rescuer. But I did not answer like that. I answered with patience. I answered with just enough detail to keep the thread alive. The board woman called me at 11:43 p.m. Her voice was no longer warm. It had gone thin and papery, like she was standing in a room where the air itself had changed. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Is this real?" I stared at the ceiling. The dog was asleep at the foot of the bed. Daniel was not there. We had stopped pretending by then. "It's real enough to make me leave my marriage," I said. There was a long silence on the other end. A silence with weight in it. "She told us you were unstable," the woman said finally. "She said you had become obsessive." Of course she did. The story had always been moving before I caught up to it. She's very persuasive, I said.
That's why I'm sending you this before she can explain it away. When the call ended, I sat in the dark and felt something loosen inside me. Not healing. Not yet. But momentum. That was the thing Mara had never understood. A person can take a great deal from you and still fail to steal your direction. By the next afternoon, 2 more people had contacted me. One from her office. One from her fitness class. Both with the same careful tone. Both asking whether they should be worried. I told them what I knew. Not everything at once. Just enough. Truth is a staircase. People climb it when they are ready. Mara texted me at 2:06 p.m. We need to talk. You are making a mistake. Then, a minute later, please call me before this gets out of hand. Out of hand. Another phrase people use when they mean, please stop this before I lose control of the story. I did not reply. She called 3 times. I let it ring. Then came the voicemail. Her voice was trembling, but not with remorse. With panic. You are ruining everything, she said. I tried to help you. I tried to protect you from making a fool of yourself. There it was at last. The truth standing in the room without makeup. She had not been saving me. She had been shaping me. Positioning me. Nudging me toward suspicion so she could later step into the clean, wounded role of the only one who ever cared. But now the rooms were filling with other voices, other witnesses, other versions of her. There was the woman she told I was too sensitive. The co-worker she told my marriage was fragile anyway. The friend she told Daniel was probably being emotionally neglected. Each of them had believed they were hearing concern. Each of them had been handed a shard and told it was a mirror. I met Daniel one last time in a cafe near the courthouse. He looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier. Or maybe honesty just makes people look older faster. He did not touch his coffee. He kept turning the cup in tiny circles with one hand, as though he could still grind the moment smooth if he stayed busy enough. I should have shut her down earlier, he said. I knew she crossed lines. I watched him carefully. There was regret in him. I believe that much. But regret is not the same as innocence. You let her stand between us, I said. He looked at the table. Yes. That answer hurt more than any defense would have. Because there was nowhere to push it. No way to argue with a person who finally chooses the truth too late. I don't know if we can fix this, he said. We can't, I said. But we can stop pretending this happened in a vacuum. He nodded once. That was all. We were not enemies. We were not lovers anymore either. We were 2 people standing on opposite sides of a house that had already burned down, deciding what to salvage and what to let turn to ash. Mara's downfall was quieter than I expected. It rarely comes with the sound you imagine. No sirens. No public collapse. Just the slow withdrawal of trust. The board asked her to step away. Her office reassigned her clients. Her fitness class stopped saving her a spot. The woman who used to smile at her across brunch tables began checking her phone whenever Mara walked in. The worst part, for her, was not losing people. It was losing access. Losing the ability to steer the room before anyone realized the room was moving. She tried to call me again. This time I answered. Her breath caught immediately. So this is what you wanted, she said. No, I said. This is what you earned. She went silent. I could hear traffic behind her. I could hear her trying to decide whether anger or pleading would be more effective. You're destroying my life, she said at last. I almost laughed. It was such a precise echo of everything she had done to me. "No," I said. "I'm ending the version of your life that depended on mine." There was no answer after that. Only breathing. Then the click of the line going dead. I sat in my car for a long time after that call. The world outside kept moving with complete indifference. A woman crossed the parking lot carrying flowers. A boy in a blue hoodie dropped his keys and swore softly. Life does not pause for the endings it causes. I used to think revenge would feel like fire. Hot. Immediate. Obvious. But what I felt was colder. Cleaner. More precise. It felt like removing a splinter after months of infection. That does not make it noble. I know that. I do not need to decorate it. What I did was cruel in its own way. I took apart the reputation she had spent years polishing and laid the pieces where other people could see them. But she had built that reputation out of other people's trust. Out of stolen confidence. Out of selective kindness. Out of the belief that if she sounded compassionate enough, no one would notice how often she was in the center of other people's pain. There is a difference between being loved and being believed. She had enjoyed both for a long time. I left her with neither. 3 months later, I moved into a smaller apartment across town. No guest room. No spare key for anyone. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's piano practice and the hum of the refrigerator at night. It felt honest. Honest spaces make fewer promises. Daniel and I finalized the separation. He did not fight it. I did not beg him to. We signed papers like people closing a file that had grown too heavy to carry. Sometimes I think about the woman I was before Mara started whispering in the corners of my life. I think about how easily I mistook intimacy for safety. How much I trusted shared history to protect shared loyalty. But history is not a shield. It is only a record. And records can be read by people who intend to use them. The last time I saw Mara was outside a pharmacy in late autumn. She was wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker. Smaller. That is what consequences do. They shrink the room a person expects to occupy. She saw me too. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she lifted her chin, as if dignity could be summoned by posture alone. "You didn't have to do it like that," she said quietly. I almost asked her what she thought I should have done. Protected her? Spared her? Accepted the ruins and thanked her for the lesson? Instead, I said, "Neither did you." Her mouth tightened. For a second, I saw something real on her face. Not sorrow. Not regret. Recognition. The recognition of a person finally seeing the edge of the cliff they pushed someone else toward. Then it was gone. She looked away first. That was the closest thing to surrender I ever got from her. I walked on. I did not turn back. Sometimes people ask whether I regret it. The answer is complicated, and I have learned not to dress complexity as innocence. I regret that my marriage had to die in order for me to see my friend clearly. I regret that I loved someone who made me doubt my own reflection. I regret that Daniel and I became spectators to our own ruin, while Mara sat in the audience and applauded just enough to stay believable. But do I regret ruining her reputation? No. Not when that reputation was built like a stage set, all painted windows and hollow walls. People say truth sets you free. That sounds gentle. It is not always gentle. Sometimes truth arrives like a storm and strips a house down to the frame. But at least then you know what is standing. Mara wanted to be the only one left standing in my life. She wanted to be the soft voice in the dark, the hand on the wrist, the one who explained my own pain to me. Instead, she became the cautionary tale people use when they talk about friendships that look tender from the outside and rotten in the middle. And me? I became someone harder to manipulate. Not harder to love. Just harder to fool. There is a difference. I still keep the screenshots in a folder. Not because I need to revisit them. Because memory, once sharpened, should not be left to rust. They remind me that betrayal rarely arrives wearing a mask. It often arrives in a cardigan, with a soft voice, asking if you've been sleeping enough. I used to think revenge would give me closure. It did not. Closure is a word people use when they want grief to behave. What I got instead was clarity. Cold, exact clarity. Enough to leave. Enough to breathe. Enough to stop mistaking a wound for a home. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Not that I broke her. Not that I exposed her. But that when she tried to turn my life into a story she controlled, I took the pen from her hand. She ruined my marriage. I ruined the lie she lived inside. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt like mine.